Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how I use solvent or paint thinner to blend colored pencils. This technique is a really big part of my drawing process, so I'm really excited to demonstrate it here for you today. You don't need very many supplies to get started with this process. I use a product called Utrecht NOOD No Odor Paint Thinner, which I really like. It is very inexpensive. A bottle about this size will last me approximately a year, and I'm using it all the time, so that's great. I blend my solvent with a variety of different brushes. I particularly like these flat brushes, a small or flat brush, because I do a lot of detail in my artwork, but you want to find something with a firm bristle. You don't want anything that's too floppy. This is a great one. There's one from Princeton that I really like. Again, the key thing is that it's not a floppy brush. You can even go so far as to use some of these more scrubber type brushes. This is another one from Princeton, the Princeton Blender. And if I'm blending a larger area like a background, I will pull in a larger brush like this, but most of the time you're going to see me working with these really small number 2, number 4 size brushes. I am working today for my demonstration with Prismacolor pencils. This technique will work with any brand of pencils, but Prismacolor are particularly good because they deposit a lot of pigment. They're really soft pencils, they blend really well, and I think they're going to do a really good job for me today demonstrating this technique for you. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this space off and get started and show you some swatches. All right. One of the things that I want to mention before I get started is that I really like to decant my paint thinner into another container. This is because over time some sediment can build up in the bottle if you're using it straight from the bottle, which you can do, but I prefer to decant it, so I have put it in this bottle that I purchased for acetone. It's an acetone dispenser and it works really great. I also have a washcloth, an old washcloth here on the side to use to dab off the excess solvent. And then I've got a couple of my Prismacolor pencils. I've got pomegranate and crimson red. I think these both give a really good demo because they're going to lay down lots of great color. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me just make a swatch here with my pomegranate and we'll just get started. So I'm also working on a paper called Museum Mount. This is from Legion Paper, Rising Museum Mount Board, that I love to work on. It's my favorite, but this again technique will work with any paper. I'm going to try to make a swatch big enough that you'll be able to really see this technique in action. So the point of using solvent in your drawing process is that it is going to dissolve the binders that hold this pigment together. I almost think of it as like releasing the pigment. It's going to turn this into an almost paint-like substance. So I'm going to go into my decanter here, get some solvent on my brush, and then I'm going to dab it off on my cloth because I want a fairly dry brush. And then I'm just going to come straight over, and I think you can see how nicely it just dissolves that pigment. It gets rid of any graininess that might be in the pencil and just creates this really nice smooth layer that I can build on in my colored pencil artwork. So it's just beautiful. That pomegranate is such a really pretty Prismacolor pencil. Here I can do a second demo right next to the pomegranate. This is my crimson red from Prismacolor. And you can use any type of pressure you want as you're applying this pencil. I tend to work in light layers, so I will layer several colors together, or sometimes I'll just layer one color a few times like you can see me doing here. I'm just going back over this swatch to try to get rid of any of the white of the paper, as much of it as I can here. But if you're working with a harder pressure or a heavier hand, you might say, this technique will still work. You just want to make sure you have enough pigment on the paper so that you have something for the solvent to work on. So this time I'm going to clean off the brush a little bit more, just so that I don't drag any of the pomegranate over into my crimson red. But yeah, the same, this is such an easy technique. You can see that this just blends right over, dissolves that pigment. Makes it start to look like paint. Beautiful. Alright, next I thought I would demo another technique that I like to do with the solvent, and that's just blending two colors together. I picked out Indanthrene Blue and Copenhagen Blue from Prismacolor, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to start just by making a swatch of the Indanthrene Blue. And again, I'm being very messy here, but I just want to get a swatch that's big enough that will show up for you here on camera. So real quick, few layers of pencil there. Now over here I've got my Copenhagen Blue. And then I'm going to do a layer first of the Indanthrene. And I'm going to layer some Copenhagen on top. Let's see what kind of blending we get. You can see that the Indanthrene is a much darker value than the Copenhagen. Copenhagen's a really nice bright blue. And so I think we'll get a nice mix of colors here. And now I can just come in and get some of my pigment on my brush. One of the big mistakes I think people make when they start to blend with solvent is that they have too much of the solvent on their brush. You don't need that much. You want to make sure you start off with a drier brush. You can always add more if you need to, but I don't want the paper to get really wet. I don't want the colors to bleed, so I'm careful with how much of that I use. So come in and get some more solvent and blend over my Copenhagen and show you what that looks like. Nice bright blue. And let's look at what they look like when I blended them together. We should get a unique color that is somewhere in between. And the color you get when you blend, of course, is going to depend on the amount of each of the different colors you use. I could make this darker by adding more of the Indanthrene. But yeah, that's just a beautiful, I love that color that I created there. So pretty. Another one of my favorite ways to use solvent is to blend colors together to create a darker color than I would be able to with just the pencils alone. So for example, I have this olive green from Prismacolor, which is one of my favorite colors. I buy these in bulk. This is really great for my botanical artwork. And you can see what a beautiful green this is. Again, it's really great for botanical artwork. It looks very natural for leaves especially. So get a good swatch down here of this. Now the problem that I sometimes run into is that I do like a lot of contrast in my artwork, and I like lots of dramatic shadows in particular. And this green, as beautiful as it is, you can see isn't really dark enough. So what I can do is come in with a darker gray or any of the darker valued colors, but I really like to use these 70 to 90% gray. I can put a layer of this down first. You know, let me just show you how I can blend these together for a really nice natural look. So starting off with maybe a few more layers of the dark gray on this side. And then as I move out, I'm just gonna have a very light amount. And then I can come over all of this with my olive green. What I'm going to be left with at the end of this is a color that is very similar in hue to my olive green, but just a lot darker. And I'm going to carry this green on out onto the white of the paper where I don't have any of that dark gray. And then I'm going to blend this all together to show you what this might look like in an actual piece of artwork that's similar to how I might blend. So I'm going to get some solvent on the brush. And I can come back in. I usually like to start on the lighter side and work my way back to the more shadowed areas so I'm not dragging too much of that dark pencil into the light areas. But this creates a really natural looking transition, a little bit more solvent, between the lighter value and the darker value of that olive green. Really beautiful. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you about this technique is that once the solvent has completely dried, which takes just a few minutes because, like I said, the paper never gets really wet, but once all of that paint thinner has evaporated, I can come in and layer on top of this as many times as I want to. So I can come back in, this is back to my olive green, and really make this look nice. I always do at least 2 layers. So I always add a base layer, blend with solvent, and come back with another layer of pencil because it just makes it look really nice and smooth. And I always get asked how many times can I blend back and forth. I can come back over this and blend over with solvent multiple times, as many times as I need to. I usually don't need to, but occasionally I do, and that works perfectly well. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that you can come over with other colors. So for example, I've got my white Prismacolor here, and I can work on top of this blue to add detail, and you can see that that shows up really nicely. And there are techniques that I can use to get that to show up even better, but that works beautifully. There are a lot of further techniques that you can use as you become more comfortable with this solvent. This is just the basics that I'm giving you here today. I do also want to go ahead and show you some of my completed drawings so you can see how I would actually use this in a completed piece of artwork. Okay, here is one of my recently completed drawings. I really like to draw these big, beautiful flowers, and I just would use the exact same process that I demonstrated on the swatches, where I'll put a layer of colored pencil down and I'll come over and blend everything out with the solvent. I'll let that dry completely, and then I'll come over and start adding my final layers and details on top of that. Here is a bird that I drew recently, again using these same techniques. I would lay down the color and come over and blend out with solvent. I used a technique on the bird where I put a layer of white down first so that when I came over with the other pigments and then the solvent on top of that, it really revealed those white highlights that were underneath there. So that created a nice look of feathers for this guy. So here's another recent drawing that I did of some plums on a branch, and I used a couple of other techniques with the solvent on this one. In particular on these leaves, I used a tiny electric eraser to pull up lots of texture in here and then blended over that with the solvent to make it look really nice and smooth but have that texture coming from underneath. I also used solvent on the actual plums to create this look of almost a bloom on the plums. So blending these lighter colors into the darker purples to create that look, which I just really love. So my advice to anybody who is new to this technique is to pick up some solvent. Again, very inexpensive. Get yourself an inexpensive paintbrush and just play around. There are so many easy ways to get started, and as you experiment more, there are so many ways that you can take this process and technique even further in your artwork.